So thank you again, everybody, for being here. And let me introduce you to Sam Julien, who is our speaker tonight. So thank you, Sam, for being here. And yeah, so Sam he's in developer relations, which is another amazing topic that we will probably talk about in the future. But so he works at Auth0, and essentially his job is to help developers use this platform, Auth0, and deal with identity and authentication. So that's where he is at right now. And so you know, he has a lot of background in Angular, and also like full stack JavaScript, Node and GraphQL is where he's having a lot of fun these days. And so his job as a developer, as a DevRel, as the cool people say these days, is to essentially, you know, get the feedback. Cool people say this anyway. I'm just so. What am I saying? So yeah, his job is essentially helping, you know, like from developers who use this platform Auth0, is trying to get this feedback. You know, here he's listening to the community and trying to see what can be improved, what can be changed, and hopefully maybe teach people a few things about how to use the platform. So that's his job, and also he streams. He likes to stream on Twitch, on Auth0. Auth0 has a channel, and he also has his own channel. I think it's Sam Julien, very simply, on twitch.tv, where I'm making some videos. So yeah, also he has an ebook about how to become a DevRel. So if you're interested, go check it out. And yeah, that's I think I'll stop there. So thank you so much, Sam Julien. I didn't even introduce the topic. Oh my goodness. What we're going to talk about tonight is building a learning system. So this is what we're going to be talking about tonight, and this is going to be very exciting. You know, especially on this day of JavaScript fatigue and, you know, new shiny things every month. I think it's a very valuable topic. So thank you again for presenting.
Thank you. Wow, that was like a world-class introduction. I feel like I was like, wow. I've spoken at many a conference, and that was a great introduction. Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. I am a big fan of Collab Lab and what Andrew's been doing. I lived in Portland for about 4 years, and then now I live in Vancouver, Washington, so just over the river. So I've been in the Portland tech scene for a little while, and so I've been following Collab Lab for a little while now. So I'm super honored to be here. Let's see, share my screen. Technology. Okay, so, and then I got to remember to hide my controls. Okay, can you see my screen? Everybody good to go? All right. I'm going to go ahead and assume that's a yes because I can't see the chat.
That's a yes. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, something about these like virtual presentations where it's like all the stars have to align at the same time with your technology. So we're going to talk today about building a learning system, leveling up predictably and repeatably. So as Eve has given me this great introduction, when I got into developer relations, I moved from regular full stack developer in Portland to the Auth0 content team in 2018, and then I moved to the DevRel team in 2019. And content and DevRel in some ways are kind of sound like a dream come true, right? Like you basically get paid to learn and teach others, and that's true. And I'm really grateful to have this job. But it leads to some very interesting problems when you basically get paid to learn for a living. The biggest one that tends to come up is feeling like you're this hamster on a wheel chasing new shiny technology and trying to create content for it, like videos and articles and things like that. And so as I was getting into this career, I started wondering, like, am I actually becoming a better developer through all of this? Or am I just sort of like jumping from shiny thing to shiny thing and learning, you know, how to write about shiny things, but not actually learning things that are useful in the real world. And so it occurred to me, though, this problem of feeling like, how can I consistently learn useful, practical stuff without getting burned out? This is very reminiscent of what it's like to be a self-taught developer. And I would know because I am a self-taught developer. So there's this crazy parallel of going between, you know, the DevRel side of things and when you're first learning to be a developer. So I gave this talk at PDX Junior Developers, and I'm excited to give it here because I'm hoping that I can save you all some heartache with some of the things that I have been learning lately as a developer advocate. So the top takeaways of this talk are going to be, first, the value of a systematic approach to learning. Second, some ingredients to predictable and repeatable growth. And then some practical tips on building your own learning system. So I don't really need to say too much here because Eve did such an amazing job. But the only thing I want to add is that I am also a self-taught developer. I mentioned that. I didn't go to boot camp. I don't have a degree in computer science. So I learned everything from the internet and a bunch of people who helped me and guided me along the way. And so because of that, I'm really, really passionate about helping other self-taught developers because there were some kind of key components there that I feel extremely lucky that I had fall into place. And so that motivates me to teach other people. So I'm going to skip all of this stuff because Eve already said all of that like a wonderful MC. And this is the second iteration of this talk. So I would love any feedback that you have if there are things that were unclear or if there's something you want to hear more about. Please let me know because I'm going to continue to refine this talk. Okay, so let's first talk about the need for a learning system. And the key word here is system. So I think I would imagine that all of you probably agree that sometimes learning to code or just being a developer in general can feel really overwhelming. It constantly feels like there's stuff to learn, right? And it's overwhelming for a lot of reasons. One reason is that it's overwhelming just to know what to learn in the first place. Sometimes it feels like, if you have your first job, for example, you start worrying like, am I just getting really good at my day job or am I actually becoming better as a developer, which is similar to what I was feeling. It's also overwhelming sometimes because it's really difficult to feel like you can cross anything off your list, right? You like have this unending pile of unfinished tutorials and courses and things like that, this unending list of side projects or technologies you want to learn. And so it's really tough to feel like you're making progress. It's also unclear what's useful. We've kind of talked about this, we've alluded to this earlier, but it's unclear to know, is it helpful if I learn Node? And if so, like, is it useful to be able to read from files in Node, or is this just some arbitrary tutorial that I found on the internet and it's not going to help me in the real world? So all of these things really muddle the waters. And one thing that I find is really helpful to share for people in this situation, as I've been there so often, is it's helpful if you try not to think of being a developer and learning to code as a dictionary to memorize. That is what leads to this feeling of just being completely overwhelmed. It helps if you kind of shift your thinking and try to think like an explorer. Have an explorer's mindset. If you think about it, I like old video games, and in a lot of ways, learning to code is sort of like this video game or board game where you don't get to see the entire map at once. You just get to see little pieces of the map. You don't know the whole storyline. And it's helpful to kind of have that mindset instead of thinking of it as this linear process. You're just sort of going out and exploring new pieces of territory and questing around, trying to find treasure and things like that. And that's really more what learning to code is. And it thus has basically no end. Now, there's an important distinction here, though, between wandering and exploring. Wandering is more aimless than exploring. Wandering is, it's easy to get lost when you're wandering. We actually have a tendency to cover a lot less ground or get very lost when we just wander around. Humans are actually surprisingly bad at navigating by gut feel. When I first moved to Portland, I did a bunch of outdoor wilderness classes and things like that. And I took a couple of classes on like compass navigation and that kind of thing. And humans are just notoriously bad at being able to go more than maybe a few yards in a perfectly straight line. And there's kind of a reason for that. It's because we've actually evolved this highly adapted, highly sophisticated sense of pattern matching. So we're constantly trying to find patterns in things and look for what's familiar. And so this makes it really hard for us to kind of systematically explore somewhere, which is kind of how human civilization developed. And so there's sort of this correlation that comfort is the enemy of growth, because you can't travel very far when you're just kind of wandering aimlessly. If you think about a time where you were driving somewhere for the 1 millionth time and you just sort of checked out, and before you knew it, you were back home, or you were at your kid's school, or you were at the grocery store, or whatever else. That's sort of an example of this. Our brains really like to make as few decisions as possible, and we really like homeostasis and equilibrium. So when you're in your comfort zone, you don't really have to think, and you don't really have to change. Now, you might be thinking at this point, wait, didn't you literally just say like 5 slides ago that learning to be a developer is really overwhelming? And you're totally right. The resistance that you're feeling, the sense of being overwhelmed, is that pull to remain as you are, because growth is really uncomfortable. And so you're trying not to feel that growth. So we try to muster up a lot of motivation, try to get going again, but then inevitably, like, our motivation runs out. And so we find ourselves kind of wandering aimlessly again. Which leads me to kind of the main point here, which is that systems are much better than motivation when it comes to trying to make progress on something. When I first moved to Portland, I kind of experimented with this process. Like, I didn't know very many people. I didn't really have very many friends. I really wanted to just kind of like hide away under a rock and come home from work exhausted and not go anywhere. But deep down, I really wanted to get out and explore. So I kind of forced myself by making this kind of nerdy system where I would pick an area of town that I wanted to explore, and I would find one thing that I wanted to do there. And that would like kind of get me out of the house. Like, I found a bagel place in wherever or something, and then I would use that to explore that part of town. This is a picture of a synthesizer store in North Portland called Control Voltage, and that was where I picked in North Portland to go explore, because that was like something that I wanted to nerd out over, and that's what led me to explore the rest of North Portland. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with a system for exploring. Now, I always have to add a caveat in here that when I talk about things like comfort being the enemy of growth and things like that, I'm not talking about like, I'm not saying, so this is at the end of this talk, this is a lesson to just like hustle and grind more. Like, I'm not saying that. Like, that's not, self-care is important. I'm not saying you need to like work a bunch of hours. It's actually kind of the opposite of that. I really actually want you to be more effective in the however many hours a week you have to put toward this, even if it's an hour a week, or 2 hours or something like that, or 30 minutes when you're on lunch break or whatever, like wherever you're at in your coding journey. I just want you to have a better throughput to be able to do more effectively. So that's my caveat. A really nice quote that I like that really sums this up is by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, which is an amazing book. It's so popular that you would think it's overrated, but it's actually not overrated. But he says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. When motivation's low, you need a system to keep you going. So let's talk about qualities of an effective learning system. And as we go into this, if you are working as a developer right now, I know there's probably a mix of people here. Some are probably not there yet and some are. If you are working in any sort of developer job right now, or if you're in a boot camp or something, you've kind of already got a version of this in place, right? Because you're having to do things that you're not necessarily choosing to do, and they're leveling you up. And we'll see why in just a second. But looking back at some of my previous jobs, if I think about work that was at the time I thought was really boring and difficult, and I was dreaming of traveling and doing whatever I wanted, those were actually the times that I grew the most. So a lot of times when people learn about developer relations or something like that, they think like, well, I'm just, I've got this day job, but I'm not actually learning new things because I don't do what you do. And it's often the opposite. They're actually growing quite a lot in that. So keep that in mind. So what we're after here is predictable and repeatable growth. So what actually causes us to grow? Well, there's actually a little bit of a formula to this that people in the education field have figured out, which is we grow by doing challenging things quickly and then getting feedback on that. So let's look at that one thing at a time. I kind of breezed by that quickly. Doing challenging things quickly and getting feedback. So the first half of this, maybe you're looking at taking a lot of notes and realizing you're getting lost and things like that. And this is sort of the antidote for that. So there are a few qualities of a learning system that will lead to doing challenging things quickly. One thing you can do is make it trackable. Another thing you can do is make it measurable. So where am I at in this process? How do I know whether I'm successful? And then you also want to make it production focused. You want to be thinking about shipping deliverables like websites or projects or articles or videos or wherever else. And then we also grow by doing these challenging things quickly and then getting feedback. And I think I forgot to say an example of this. Like if you think about when you're working out or basically the principles of like weightlifting, right? The way that you're pushing your muscles to grow is by actually giving them more than they can stand for a specific period of time. And you're having to like perform and rise to that occasion. And then you get feedback, which is that your muscles are sore, right? So this is a natural process for us. So the feedback part of this, when we're talking about a learning system, there's of course the like kind of the most basic, which is, does it work? Does the code run? That's, good feedback. There's also a great trick, which is learning in groups, which is what the Collab Lab does, which is why it's so awesome. Learning with other people can be a really good way to get feedback on what you're doing. You're doing these challenging things, and then you're getting peer feedback from it. By the same token, learning in public is another great way of getting feedback, meaning if you maybe publish a blog article about something that you're learning or give a talk about it, hint, hint, I know Eve is looking for speakers for this, then that's a great way of kind of putting your knowledge to the test and then getting feedback on it and kind of reiterating on it. So those are sort of the two core principles of building the actual learning system, but there's some other qualities that you want. For example, you want to be able to accommodate different depths of learning. And you've probably experienced this as you're learning to code. There's different kind of levels of mastery as you're learning something. There's something in education called Bloom's Revised Taxonomy, and it's not very important that you remember that or know the details about it necessarily, but there's sort of these layers that you can see on this pyramid where the base layer is kind of basic recall, like basic knowing, like knowing that JavaScript has something called a function, and then the next level is the basic understanding of that knowledge. And then it kind of progresses from there to where you're more and more able to kind of strategize and decide when to use something and when not to use something. And so as you're systematically learning, you want to be able to dive into these different areas, because basic recall is a very different process than maybe writing a blog article, like a tutorial on integrating a technology in a high-level system or something like that. Another spin on this, there's another thing in education called Webb's depth of knowledge. And this is another good way of thinking about this, where there's recall and production versus basic skills and concepts and application, and then being strategic and then trying to extend it. So if we were to think about that with code, it'd be something like, learning the basics of building a simple website, and then maybe how you would add features to it, and then how you would scale it up to be able to accommodate a bunch of users and things like that. So you want your, whatever system you've got set up to be able to take this into account, because what works at the recall level doesn't necessarily work as you're learning through the strategic and extended thinking phases. Another thing you want to keep in mind is your learning style. I know for some reason the topic always comes up, like on Twitter or other places. There's always a lot of gatekeeping around style of learning, and somebody inevitably says that like people who watch videos are dumb or something like that, and that's, that doesn't make any sense. Like you should, if you work better with documentation, then great, just use that. And if you work better with watching videos, great, do that. I'm a very like pragmatic, hands-on kind of person, and so I'm very visual and tactile with my learning, and that's what works for me, is building things and getting my hands dirty with the code and things like that. So basically just go with your style of learning and don't feel guilty about it, is the point of that. And then lastly, you want to have some element of fun in here. Like sometimes you don't have a choice about what you can learn, and other times you do. And so if you make your learning just total drudgery, you're not going to want to do it. You're not going to want to stick with it. One example for me is I've tried a couple of times to learn the language Haskell, which is very academic and derives from like lambda calculus or something like that. And I've tried many times, and it's just not fun for me. I just don't think I can do it. So I've sort of abandoned that. So those are kind of the qualities that you want to look for. Now let's kind of we're going to go down a level to more practical, which is the components of a learning system. And I should tell you, this might look different for you, because what works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. But the point is really kind of the concepts, and you might be able to draw some inspiration from these things as kind of signposts to build your own learning system. So what's been working for me lately is to have one inbox for each learning area, not like email inboxes, but like a single source of truth, somewhere that I can put all my notes, all my links, resources, learning materials, all in one place for one particular area. Because this really helps me contextualize information and then make connections a lot faster. Another thing that helps me is to have some sort of review process. I think this is the one that people miss the most often. We sort of have this, like, we leave this long trail behind us of like to-do lists and projects and Google Docs and things like that. And we don't really go back and like circle back and maintain those things or review their status or figure out if they're still relevant to us or things like that. So this helps a lot. It also helps a lot because we don't have as much time to code switch into a new context. There's a guy that I like a lot named Tiago Forte, who's kind of a productivity knowledge base. I don't know how to describe him, but he writes and makes courses and things like that. But he has this idea of switching from the like heavy lift mentality versus the slow burn mentality. So think about when you open up, maybe you've been working on a blog article on something, or maybe you've been working on a side project, but you haven't picked it up in like 2 months. And so you open it up for the first time in 2 months, and it takes you maybe 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours to actually remember what's going on with it and what's happening with it. And so that slows us down a lot. And if we can incorporate a review process, then we can take a lot less time. If it's only been a week since the last time you looked at it, then even if you're not working on it, you're going to be able to work on it a lot faster the next time. The next thing you're going to need is a reliable project management system. And this is something that you need to be able to ship small things quickly. So one thing that I have to clarify here is a lot of people, I think, get tripped up on areas versus projects. So for example, an area would be like learn JavaScript, which is very different, vastly bigger than a project, which would be like, I'm going to make a site that will display my name on the page. That's a project. So that's what I'm talking about with a project management system. What you want to do is identify the smallest unit of work that you can get done and then do it quickly. And then you repeat it basically. So the project management system is to help you accomplish that. So if you're stuck on a project, what you might need to do is break it down smaller. Maybe this thing that you thought was a project is actually more of like a broad area. And so you don't feel like you're making any sort of progress because you don't have something tangible and deliverable to actually get out the door. So the smaller it is, the more doable it is. And that is sort of the key here. So if you ever find yourself stuck on something like, I haven't made progress on this thing in months, you might need to zoom out a level. For me, for example, I've been learning about Amazon Web Services, AWS, and it's really complex. And there's a lot of vocabulary words and a lot of things to learn. And there's been many times that I've had to go like, I'd read a sentence and then I didn't know half the words on them. So then I'd have to go look up all those words. And then I'd have to, go back like 3 levels before I could be like, okay, what is cloud computing? Okay, then I would work my way down. A good kind of practical way to do this is like this. So a lot of times the most complicated thing we can do with something that we're learning is try to build a system with it or fit it into an existing system. So this is, maybe you're trying to build like a complex application or something like that. And maybe you need to zoom out a little bit. Maybe you haven't made any progress on that and you need to zoom out a level and just try to solve one problem with it. And if that's still not happening, if you're not able to get that out the door, then maybe you need to do something smaller with it. Maybe you need to just get the code to run or something like that. And then if that's not working, just try to do literally anything with it. This is when, you're console logging hello world, and that counts as getting something done. Whatever you need to do to zoom out to actually accomplish something is going to help you a lot. Because you're going to feel like you're actually making progress on things. I had this happen recently. I was trying to learn the framework Svelte, and I naively thought I could just kind of jump into the code and get something done. And by the end, a couple hours later, I was literally just trying to get the thing to build and just get my data to show up on the page, and just having to kind of zoom out until I could figure out what was going wrong. This process, by the way, is also very similar to debugging. You can use a really similar kind of like zoom out process with your debugging, and it might help. But remember, the reason we're trying to do this and zoom out till we have more doable, small, tiny pieces that we can get out the door is because the learning is in the speed of the action. You're trying to test your reflexive knowledge or test your limits in order to figure out where you're at in the learning spectrum. So if you don't succeed in whatever you're trying to do, you're not really failing, you're just getting more data. It's not a failure, it's a test. You're just saying like, oh, okay, trying to add a new route to this application was too complex for me. I'm not there yet. So that's good to know. Next time I'll go smaller, Okay, so now we'll get even more tactical, more practical, and just go over some tools for the learning system. And the 3 big ones that you'll need are some sort of scratchpad, some sort of task manager, and then some sort of knowledge system. So the scratchpad, this is things like Notepad or Google Docs or Drafts, which is I'll show you Drafts in a second, but it's a Mac application that you might not have heard of. But what you're looking for here is speed, ease of use, and ability to export elsewhere. So basically what you need is just you could actually get a physical pad if you wanted to, like a waiter's pad or a physical notebook or something, and just write things down and scan them in. But this is just sort of like your notes that are off the top of your head, just so you can keep track of things. it might not even be considered like a draft of something you're actually working on. Then you need some sort of task manager that's going to help you with shipping those small projects or big projects. But all of your projects, you need something to keep track of the steps in that process. So this is software like OmniFocus or Things or Google Keep. And the important things here are you want something that works with the way you think. A lot of these task managers I find kind of work really well for different people, right? So like OmniFocus works really well for me because I'm very like linear and methodical and things like that. But like my partner, like she doesn't think that way. It would drive her like up the wall to have to do that. So she uses something completely different, and that's fine, you know. You also want, most likely you're going to want some sort of ability to add context or tags or like group things together, just so you don't have one jumbled mess of notes and things like that, or tasks or a to-do list. And then the third thing is what's called a knowledge base. You might have heard of Evernote. That's kind of the most popular one. Notion is the one that I use. Roam is like a research tool. But these are things that these are like your digital notebooks, basically. When I talked about having one inbox that you're just keeping everything in, this is like your knowledge base of everything. So you want to look for the ability to like link between documents and have things in collections. You'd also prefer to have the ability to add like multimedia, pictures, things like that. So I've kind of put all this together for myself into this thing called a learning snapshot, where I track a bunch of different things at once, where I have things organized by area, and then I pick one anchor resource that I want to track the progress on. And then I might have other links, like other courses or tutorials or things like that, that are kind of like my library of information, but I don't necessarily have to do everything on them. So I might have one big JavaScript course that I'm trying to work through, and then all these other little ones that I might refer to or something, or maybe a collection of articles, but they're just sort of my references. They're not something that I'm concerned with like actually finishing. And then I keep all of my notes in one place in the learning area or the learning snapshot. And then I can have these boards like Trello boards where I can track my project progress. So the way that I've actually practically implemented this, and I'm going to actually show you this on my screen in a second, but I use a tool called Drafts for all my quick notes. And then I export those notes into a tool called Notion for storing and tracking. And then I use OmniFocus to track all my projects and tasks. Okay, that was a lot of like abstract stuff and things like that. So let me just quickly show you like what each of these tools are. So let me Okay, so let me hide my meeting controls. And let me first show you Drafts. So this is Drafts. It's a Mac only app, but there are other similar tools out there, so don't worry about that. But this like types really quickly. It doesn't try to interpret my data at all or anything like that. And then I can just export it. I can do this like, where'd it go? Here we go. Yeah, so it lets me basically send this data anywhere. I could create a new Google Doc. I could email it. I could save it in Airtable, anything I want to do with it. So it doesn't matter what I need to do with this document. I can just type it and process it later, basically deal with it later. And then Notion is my like huge database of everything in my brain, basically. So I have it organized where I have like projects and different areas of my life and resources and things like that. And I actually have for the links at the end here, I've got some of Tiago Forte's like links and stuff like that on this whole system. So if you want to deep dive into that stuff, be my guest. But the important thing is I track project progress in here. So if I go to like my sprint, you can see that I've got like these cards that represent different projects that I'm working on, kind of at a higher level. And then I have my learning snapshots, which is basically this kind of system where I, for example, I'm doing a lot with AWS right now. And so I can track like why I'm doing it. It's because I'm trying to get this cloud practitioner certificate. I have this Anchor resource, which is a tutorial on a website called A Cloud Guru. I'm tracking my progress just on that one course. And then I have all these other resources that I can kind of refer to. And I may not actually go through them, but I at least have them there for reference. And so, and in the links with the slides and everything, this page is publicly available, so you can look at this and copy it for yourself or whatever you want to do with it. And then the last part of the puzzle for me is OmniFocus, where I can track specific little projects that I'm working on. So here's an example where I've got to learn how to set up Ghost. It's this blogging platform on AWS. So I've actually got like the step-by-step thing so I can track actually getting this thing out the door. I don't have the kind of like publication steps on there. That would be a good, like if I had like write article or something in the creative category and then like publish article or something like that. And you can see that I've got these contexts here where I can say like, this helps me because I can, if I'm in a headspace where I feel like writing code, then I can come and work on this project. So that is the demo there. Now, one thing I want to, you're probably looking at that and thinking like, whoa, this guy has way too much time on his hands. But don't over-engineer too quickly. Keep in mind that complex systems evolve from simple systems. Like I've been doing this for several years now of like making content and learning for a living and things like that. But be slow and deliberate and manual to kind of meet your needs over time and build your own system with what works for you. Okay, I know I've covered a lot of ground here, so let's do a recap here. So we talked about some strategies for thinking like an explorer, building systematically, and kind of the underlying philosophy of this whole process. So one was thinking like an explorer. One was instead of thinking of code as a dictionary to memorize and a list of terms to learn, think of it more like a video game or an uncharted territory that you're learning to explore. The other thing we talked about was how we're kind of programmed by biology to seek comfort, and that motivation is not necessarily a good way to keep that going. And instead, we need to build systems that can help us predictably grow and improve our skills. We also talked about that the formula for growth is action plus speed plus feedback, which is really similar to like lifting weights or things like that. You're being forced to perform under pressure and then you get feedback. Then we talked about some tactics. We talked about having one inbox per learning area so that you have everything in one place. We talked about the importance of a review process so you remember where you're at in your projects and what you need to do next. We also talked about a project management system and having to ship small things quickly so that you can feel like you're making progress. And then lastly, we talked about tools. We talked about the need to have a scratch pad where you can just jot things down. Another benefit of this that I forgot to mention is that this also helps you not get distracted. I don't know about you, but I seem to inevitably think of ideas for the exact opposite project that I'm working on in the moment. And if I just bounce from project to project every time I have an idea, I'd never get anything done. So all I need to do is pop open drafts, write that thing down, and then get back to whatever it is I was working on. We also talked about a task manager that kind of works with the way you think and helps you track to-do items on whatever you're working on. And then we talked about a knowledge base where you can have kind of one big repository of knowledge for all of your notes and resources and things like that so that you can make those connections a lot faster. So I have a whole page up on my site with resources on this stuff so that you don't feel like you have to take notes and all of that stuff. So there's the slides and a bunch of resources that you can kind of meander your way into if any of this stuff is interesting for you. And that's basically it. So I really appreciate your time. And I think we have a few minutes for questions, not as many as I originally thought, but
Yeah, we
yeah.
have 15 minutes, so yeah.
Oh, great.
Thank you so much, Sam, for this talk. That was really great. I felt like I felt like there was a lot for me to be like, yes, I'm doing this. I shouldn't be doing that. Thank you so much. That was a great talk. And is there any pressing questions that are coming right away?
I'm going back through the talk. I mean the chat. Let's see.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess there's a question I did spot from Sahil a little bit earlier, and it might be a little bit, different from because you talk about building your own learning system. Sahil is talking more about, I guess, the context of that, and he's saying like he's kind of surprised that companies don't address learning as a developer more explicitly, and he's asking, are we all like drowning in this field and need guidance? So I thought it was an interesting question. That's kind of like opening up to like, okay, you're working, not in a vacuum. You're in a company. So what about learning in a company?
Yeah, I've had a variety of experiences with that. My first job, the culture was very like, we're so busy with what we're doing that we really don't have time for you to learn anything else. Like I remember asking about like being able to go to a conference, and it was sort of like, conference? Like, what do you mean? We don't have time for that. Like, you got to fix these SQL bugs, like, and that was hard, like I basically was having to just kind of like whatever time I could grab to watch tutorials or something. And I basically just tried to learn as much as I could to get out of that job because I knew it wasn't a good culture. And then I was really fortunate that the place that I ended up going after that was almost the complete opposite, where it was like they really wanted to invest in your learning and encouraged education. And so I guess all of that is just to say that, yes, it really does make a difference what your boss thinks of learning and what your company will invest in. And if you find yourself in a situation where you feel like that's less than ideal, you should talk to your boss about that. And if it's just a horrible, toxic environment, then maybe you need to work on finding somewhere else or something like that. So yeah, that makes a big difference.
I found was told a long time ago that you need to reinvent yourself about every 18 months or so, and I think it's actually gotten quicker. And to that, you can't rely. I don't believe that you can rely on your company to keep you up to date with what's going on. So you really need to keep projects going on in the background and be trying to learn what's going on. If you rely on the company, you're going to end up falling behind to the point where you're not employable.
That's a good point.
Or you're only employable at that company.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
in fact, I came from the East Coast, and one of the rules out there was that if you had been at a company for more than about 2 years, you were considered, it was questionable if you were hireable.
Wow.
Because the technology changes so much and techniques change so much. Although the dirty little secret over the years that I found is that the names change for all of these technologies and frameworks, but the techniques are still the same. I mean, we used to talk about code that was well formed. Now we talk about objects, and it's still the same basic rules. And I found that with a lot of things, even learning, and you can probably tell that I learn at a high level and then dive in. So the other thing that I found over the years is that almost all of these languages have a basic structure. They've got an if statement, a while statement, and a for statement. Once you get comfortable with that, it's easier to jump into the details.
Yep. And Sam, to kind of what you were talking about, like I think it is important to find a place that is supportive of growth and learning. But I think what your talk is really valuable for is that there's this is, well, I'm not going to mess that part up. I'll just skip that. Anyway, but there's like actually figuring out how to systematize your learning is like the thing, like the big insight. Like I feel like Zapier does a good job of supporting learning and growth, but we don't talk about how do you do that more efficiently, or how do you more systematically, how do you keep going when the motivation's not there, all those kinds of things. So I think that's kind of taking it to the next level. So I'm actually going to take this back to Zapier.
I totally agree that what Sam has done is a very, very good discussion on how to learn efficiently, regardless of whether you're trying to do it on your own or if you're trying to do it in a corporate environment.
Yeah, for sure.
I do have one question, Andrew. You had mentioned, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask it, but you had mentioned about forming small groups and doing projects. I would be interested in getting involved in that, but I don't know. I have signed up. I believe I've signed up for the Collabs apply.
Yeah, so we go through a kind of a selection process every 8 or 9 weeks for the next cohort. So we're in the middle of a cohort right now. We have 4 teams running. We're going to run the next set of teams in January. So we'll open up applications again in December. So there's, we get a bunch of applications. We have a sort of committee that tries to take some of the bias out of it and select people into those teams. We form the teams, and then they're kind of off and running for an 8-week project. So
is there a cost to it?
No, it's free.
Okay.
Free for participants, and all of myself and all the mentors are all volunteers. So just just trying to give something back to help give people a hand up who because we all had help, just like Sam was saying at the beginning of his talk. Like we've all gotten assistance from other people to get to where we are. So we're all just trying to get back a little bit.
Yeah, so if you check out the website, there's a date on there when the application process will open again for new applications, and have some more details about when those next cohort starts. So check the website out, follow us on Twitter. You'll see we'll start tweeting about it when the time's getting closer and stuff. That's a really good next step for anybody who's interested.
Yeah, excited that you're interested in doing it though. You said you applied once already, right? So I guess we'll.
I think I have. I signed up through Meetup.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it'll be through our website. We'll have a 1-week window where applications are open. You'll need to answer some questions and stuff on there, and then to be considered. So.
Okay.
I put the link in the Zoom chat here. So
Sam, I wanted to ask you. I know you mentioned different tools that you can use. When you're building the system. And you mentioned, the Scratchpad and the knowledge base. And I thought it was really interesting how, you're mentioning, because, I'm like, oh, I'm using all these tools. Yes. I'm using Google Docs. Yeah. I'm using Notion. Yay. But to some extent, I feel like in my learning, the Scratchpad and the knowledge base kind of get mixed where the Scratchpad is more than just a draft, and the knowledge base is less than a knowledge base. So I don't know if you had any input on that idea. I guess, and one thing you mentioned is don't over-engineer too quickly. And this is me, okay, I'm starting, as soon as I start learning something, I'm making it too complex. And so I think it might be related. So I was wondering if you had any, I guess, I don't know, I have a hard time just having a draft. I wanted to look pretty. So I was wondering if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, I think the key is you can tell if you're over engineering something in this process if you're not able to do it consistently. Like if it's not leading to any sort of results. I'll give you an example that isn't really about learning, but I had this kind of light bulb moment with my email. Like I had this like super complicated system of like a bunch of different labels and like filters and things like that. And I was spending like an inordinate amount of time maintaining this really complicated system. And then it occurred to me that like, I don't really need like 14 different labels. I need like 3. I need like do this later, do this now, and like maybe get to this someday or something, you know, like, and I had been like breaking it down into this super granular, like emails from mom, emails from egghead, you know, like this, and having to manage like 45 different things. So like, if you find yourself like being able to like having to move too slow and like do that kind of thing, or you can't make progress on it, like that might be a hint, that might be like a code smell almost of like, that maybe you're trying to do like you're trying to like make something too complex. Does that make sense? Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that covers the over engineering part. And then one part of the question was about, you know, and about the tools you mentioned, the Scratchpad and the knowledge base. And so I guess, you know, I guess in my mind, maybe I don't even have the Scratchpad. I just go straight to the knowledge base, you know.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that could be just the way you work too. I mean, for me, the main reason I use drafts is just because it saves me from having to think about, like, if there's something I need to write down, I don't have to think about the right place to put it. I just write it down and then figure that out later. You know what I mean? So I use it a lot for like meeting notes or, you know, article ideas or things like that, where I just need to write it down and get it out of my head and then like process it later. Eric had asked about the collaboration tool, and then Andrew said Notion, and I was going to say that as well. And they let you, I don't remember how many people you can do on the free plan, but I know it's at least 1, because my fiance and I do all of our house, like we own a house together, and so we do all of our project planning and stuff in Notion, and it's just on the free plan. So and then of course Google Docs, all the Google products let you do all the collaboration stuff, and like Apple Notes and all that stuff too.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, it's great that you went through like all these different tools for learning, and but you kind of said it a few moments ago, just start writing. And I think like even if you just start writing already, that's like amazing, you know, just taking notes, writing a blog post or whatever, and then start assimilating all these tools like you're suggesting, like going at your own pace. Because I found I never used to take notes like a long time ago, and then a little more old school, but I had a note, like a literal notepad at one point, and then I eventually went digital and stuff. But it's great for learning, but also for just like even other stuff, like when you have evaluations at the end of the year, you know, you have a log of like all the stuff you did, like you can pull out things, you know, it's just a good idea of writing. So thanks for showing all those different tools.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I actually just yesterday had an example of this kind of paying off, where I showed you my AWS like notes and everything, and somebody asked me yesterday, like, what's a really good place for a developer to get started with AWS? And I cranked out a blog article in like 2 hours, because I already had everything already compiled. Like I'd been doing that for 3 months. And so I basically just wrote a couple of paragraphs and put together all of these links and things and notes that I had taken, and was able to publish an article really quickly. So it definitely like pays off when you kind of systematically do this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is there any more questions? Otherwise I do have one. I wanted to go back to when you said that learning is in the speed of the action. I was kind of like, I don't know, it was like a food for thought for me. And I was thinking, oh, so is the idea behind the sentence is that, the quicker you learn, the quicker you do it, the more you learn? Is that the idea behind it, or did I misunderstand that?
The idea is that you're trying to get yourself in a place that you can't overthink. So where you have to just perform without getting in your own way. Like, so a good example of this would be like, if I said like, I'm going to pay you $5,000 to write a blog article by 8 p.m. tonight, like you would just like do whatever you could to do it, right? Like you would just like, whatever tools you currently have available to you, you would make it happen. You know what I mean? And so that's the trick that you're trying to play on yourself, of like putting yourself in those situations over and over again, so that like, like I kind of, one of my earliest experiences like that was that there was a job that I wanted to apply to. This was a long time ago. And so and it was really competitive. And so I like put together this website really fast in like 12 hours or something, just so I could like get my application in and everything. And like, that was a really good example of that, because it was like, I didn't do the best job at it, but like I had to test my knowledge like really quickly in a really compacted a period of time. And I was kind of like, oh, I didn't know I could do that,
So I see it's kind of like the idea, like when you're in a rush, you just kind of select what's important and you just stick to that in kind of idea. Right.
Yeah. And so when you can practice that, then you'll be able to, for things that are bigger, longer projects, you know where your gaps in your knowledge are.
I know we have reached time, so if there's any final question, we will take it. All right, last call. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you, Sam, again for the great talk. I know that there is another talk that is lined up. Actually, the Junior Developer Meetup has a talk that starts at 6 p.m. So I think people are like going to that talk right now. So yeah, don't hesitate to go over there. And yeah, just a quick reminder, this talk will be on YouTube very soon. The recording of it will be online anytime soon. And again, I'm looking for volunteers. If people want to do lightning talks, I would love to hear your ideas. So message me on Meetup or on Slack if you are on our Slack workspace. And yeah, maybe I should tease the next talk in 2 weeks on Wednesday. So that's November 4th at 5 p.m. We have Steve Gardner, who is a mentor at the Collab Lab, who is going to talk about Webpack. So yay! Kind of like, Webpack can be super intimidating if you don't know how it works. So the idea of the talk would be kind of like how to get a good, start with it. So I don't know, maybe we'll get to try Steve's learning system that he created to learn Webpack, maybe. I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, well, thank you so much, everybody. And yeah, we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.